Hi, this is Marla Phillips, Director of Xavier Health at Xavier University, and I want to share with you the FDA risk ranking initiatives from CDER and CDRH, primarily because we were involved in leading with FDA the metrics work on the device side, and we were involved in leading an industry team on the pharma side and providing some pretty significant comments on their guidance documents that came out, their draft guidance documents that came out on the call for metrics. So I want to share with you some information to give you an update on where things are with this and why they are where they are. So basically, I want to start off with the goal. So the goal of FDA risk ranking is so that the FDA can use metrics to risk rank companies so they have data to support where they are focusing their resources and, importantly, where FDA should focus their resources. So why are there differences between CDER and the CDRH metrics approach? Especially if you're in a company that has both pharma and device, you might be asking this question. If you don't, you might not even be aware that there are differences, but this would be important for you to understand. So one thing that most people don't realize is that FDA authority is different for drugs and devices. So on the drug side, when FDASIA was passed, it officially allowed FDA to use risk-based decisions to determine how best to use limited resources for drug inspections. They've been doing it forever because what else can you do? You only have so many resources, but you have an exponential number more of firms that you need to go inspect. So your only choice is to make sure that you're at least going to the ones that are the higher risk. However, FDASIA finally legally allowed FDA to do that, which is great. FDASIA allows FDA on the drug side to request records in advance of or in lieu of an inspection. And interestingly, FDA is not expressly given authority to use third parties to assist with drug inspection coverages. So because they've been allowed to ask for information in advance and they can use risk ranking, they've taken the approach of what has been referred to as the call for metrics. On the device side, however, FDASIA does not officially allow FDA to use risk-based decisions when they're determining where to send their resources, which is interesting because, as I explained, you really don't have any other choice, but they're still legally not allowed to be doing that. FDASIA does not allow FDA to request records in advance of or in lieu of an inspection on the device side, and FDA actually on the device side has authority to use third parties to assist with device inspection coverage. So because they can't call for this information from industry through legal means based on FDASIA, they've taken the approach on the device side to develop what is referred to as the case for quality, where they are working collaboratively with industry to help industry own their own quality and to move beyond compliance focus and moving towards product quality focus. So what are the metrics? If we take a look side-by-side comparison, as I mentioned, we co-led through Xavier with FDA a device metrics initiative which had FDA and industry members on the team. The case for quality was adopted by the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, and a particular organization asked that if we could come up with 3 metrics through our work. And so if we could only come up with 3, we said, well, let's take a look at one that's pre-production, one that's production, and one that's post-production. And then the enterprise-wide is, how do you conduct a management review of those metrics? So what was interesting, it was very challenging for the group to come up with something that was pre-production on how you could measure a company's ability to do something right first time, or to look at the quality of the product, because the thought was in pre-production or R&D, you're typically looking at trial and error and playing around with the product. However, we did say at some point you have decided that the product is what it's going to be, you feel that it's right, and you're about to transfer it into the manufacturing area. So once that happens, how robust was the design of that product versus how many times it had to come back for changes, or how poorly or well did the technology transfer go? So you are able to measure that, and that tells you how robust your development process is. Now, in production, we looked at right first time in production, which is not, a novel metric by any means. But again, if the goal is to do things right first time and to ensure that you have confidence in the quality of your product, then we really felt that this metric was representative of what goes on in production to give you that confidence or not. And then the post-market, we actually have an index of several different metrics that are aggregated together because it's really hard to just pick one and come up with, overall viewpoint of the way your product is performing in the market. And then, as I mentioned, we have a management review process that helps a company look enterprise-wide across R&D and production and on the market, how the product is performing. Now, on the pharma side, as I mentioned, we just led an industry team to look at how can industry own its own quality, taking a similar approach to what the device side was doing through the case for quality. And we were not limited by the number of metrics that we could have, so we came up with some that we felt were the most critical. So again, we broke that team into 3 different sub-teams: pre-production, production, and post-production. And a lot of it, as you can see here, is focused on right first time in the production area and how well the transfer goes, how well you designed it to begin with. And then in production, what can you look at that tells you if you have consistent product quality? And one that I think is really interesting is the commitment index. So many times we look at, what's your training rate, and how I guess what's your rate of closing an investigation on time, closing your CAPAs on time, all these things that you commit to. If you look at an index of them aggregated, how are you performing? Because you could say, well, we got to get our training records up to speed, and so training looks fantastic, but meanwhile you've got investigations that haven't been closed in 6 months. So this way you can't hide. You pull it all together to look at how are you performing as a company on your commitment to following through with what you said you were going to do. Again, on once the product's on the market, this particular team also took an index approach, looking at several post-market or on-market metrics and aggregated them. Enterprise-wide, we're looking at how effective was the quality by design, and taking a look at triaging the root causes from our right first time metrics. So very, very similar approaches. We just had a few more on the pharma side instead of the few. But I will point out that on our website, we have fantastic papers on the device side as well as the pharma side that really walk through what are these metrics. And then I think it's even on the device paper where we talk about how do you create a heat map, and how do you normalize the data so that you can do some assessments enterprise-wide. So very, very powerful papers if you want to look at how you could possibly implement some of these in your organization. So now if we look at that compared to the CDER approach, again, they were allowed to do the call for metrics. They've been working with industry for a number of years. Very, very challenging to do because you need to come up with an agreement on what these terms mean and how they're calculated across an entire industry, and everybody's looking at them differently. What's interesting is the industry really focused on production and post-production and really didn't identify anything that was pre-production, which we feel is a big area of opportunity, because if you want to do it right first time, you need to do it from the beginning. And then anything downstream from that would be just that much better. So the CDER draft guidance on metrics has the lot acceptance rate, invalidated OOS rate, and the complaint rate. They did have the annual product report on time rate, but that was removed last December with the second iteration of that draft guidance. So here's a side-by-side comparison of the metrics from the different sources. Now, what has been the progress of CDER and CDRH on those metrics? So CDER did their call for metrics once FDASIA was passed in 2012. They developed a draft guidance in July of 2015, followed by a guidance in June of 2016 that said, okay, here's how you can submit your data to us. And then in November, at the end of November of 2016 is when they did a revision of the draft guidance that was originally submitted with the actual metrics in them. And this is where the annual product report metric was pulled out. Now, in the November 2016 draft guidance, it provides the following information, which we do know at this point is delayed, not stopped, but it's just delayed at this point. In 2017, this program became a voluntary program where it was originally thought it would be mandatory. And there was an anticipation that the electronic submission platform would be available to test in 2017. And then in 2018, after evaluation of the results, the FDA was intending to initiate notice and comment rulemaking under existing statutory authority to develop a mandatory quality metrics reporting program. Okay, also in that guidance, it says that beyond the voluntary program, CDER intends to use the metrics in the following way: establish that early signal detection program as one factor in identifying the risks so they can determine where to send their resources, identify situations in which there may be a risk for drug supply disruption or drug shortage, improve the effectiveness of establishment inspections because there's more information now or information in advance of the inspection, and improve FDA's evaluation of drug manufacturing and control operations. So these are pretty big, I guess, goals to tackle. And, I'll just put it here on this slide that just remember the three metrics they're looking at that would drive these are lot acceptance rate, invalidated OOS rate, and complaint rate, which, you can't really get to these bullet items from these three metrics alone. So FDA is continuing to work with industry through the pilot studies, gathering information to see, what other information do they need to pull together to really hit the goals that they've got in these 4 bullets, knowing that they only have these 3 metrics, which are going to be very limited in the information they can provide, especially out of context. So now on the device side, again, they don't have the authority to ask for metrics. So they launched their Case for Quality initiative in the 2013 timeframe. Xavier partnered with FDA to lead 46 FDA officials and industry members to identify the metrics that I shared with you. It was a 2-year project. We looked at what could you measure and then what is the metric. And so it was adopted by MDIC, and now they're looking at how to incorporate the metrics along with culture possibly to look at how they can shift from a compliance focus to product quality focus. The FDA on the device side is they had the goals of by September of 2016 developing the metrics, which we hit through the work we did with them. So that was done and was done by that time. By December of last year to pilot a voluntary use of product and manufacturing quality metrics and evaluation tools, which they pretty much did. They did a preliminary pilot study, as you can see the little starburst in the bottom corner there, as they're exploring the approach of using maturity models. And so they did look at companies who were using these metrics, but importantly, what was the maturity of the systems they have in place to look at the controls they have, no matter what the metrics are. And then they were originally looking at, by December of this year, to propose a voluntary program to recognize independent evaluation of product and manufacturing quality, and they are looking at doing that through this maturity model assessment and pilot study. So the neat thing is that they're looking at all of this work to help basically remove you from the work plan for routine inspections, waive pre-approval inspections where appropriate, engage and have meetings on issue resolution instead of compliance only, modifying submission requirements and faster FDA response, accelerate the approval path, and competitive market around product excellence. So some really great incentives on the table that was put there by Jeff Shuren, who's the head of the CDRH branch. So interestingly, Xavier asked the industry, well, what do you want? The goal is that through these metrics, your company might avoid an inspection. So we said, are you interested in that? And industry said, well, not really. It doesn't really matter. I'm getting inspected left and right by every regulator out there, as well as notified bodies on the device side. And it is nice to have that touch point with FDA to verify that, yeah, you're meeting expectations before, 5 years have gone by and they come in and say everything you've been doing the past 5 years is wrong. So then we said, well, what do you want? And the one thing they said is we want our competitors to be inspected. So, that's very important to help level the playing field. So only to me, and meanwhile, you're not going to my competitors. They also said that they wanted combined inspections of multiple regulatory authorities. So you're talking about mutual reliance on the pharma side and MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, on the device side. However, just a warning that if you go down that path, which they are, mutual reliance is going forward in a great way, same with MDSAP, which I personally feel is fantastic, and it's the best way that regulators can expand their reach, that each inspection is going to carry a lot more weight. So, and then the third aspect was they want faster approval of submissions for demonstrating low risk and high control. And the one comment that I like that Jeff Shuren uses is he refers to it as kind of like the TSA pre-check. And so if you can meet these criteria and demonstrate maturity, then you can fly through the approval process much faster. But in the end, it's not over. Both CDER and CDRH are actively leading these initiatives, gaining industry input, doing pilot studies. You need to have your voice heard. They need to understand what's going to be meaningful, because it would be a shame to go through all of this work, because you saw a number of years and the number of people involved, and it doesn't move the needle, and they can't make decisions that are grounded in data that make sense and that truly does have the outcome that they're looking for. So have your voice heard, get involved. You can look on our website for the work that we've done, and just become involved. It's best for your organization to take this information and implement today, as well as to help the industry, across the industry, understand where they could go with it. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a great day.